walking to the original location of Thoreau's cabin. Thoreau was looking for a place to have some time to get away from things for a while. So his friend Ralph Waldo Emerson had owned 14 acres of land on the shores of Walden Pond, and he gave permission to Thoreau to build this cabin on his land here at Walden. People like Thoreau and Emerson, they were early conservationists. They were thinking about conservation in a totally different light. This was all private property in those days. And the people of Concord and the area bought the land here for the sole reason of coming out and cutting the trees down to use for their personal usage, for house building, for firewood. And so Emerson and Thoreau were thinking in a totally different light. This comes from his journal. This was in the year 1859. I think that every town should have a park, or rather a primitive forest, of 500 or 1,000 acres, either in one body or several, where a stick should never be cut for fuel, nor for the navy, nor to make wagons, but stand in decay for higher uses, a common possession forever, for instruction and recreation. The original house would have been right over here in this area that's marked off. It was very small, 10 by 15, you had an 8-foot high ceiling, it was one room. Thoreau wanted to live his life as simply as possible, and that meant having a small house, having as few possessions as necessary. I'll go through the front door. So his desk would have been right here. He would have done a lot of his writings early in the morning. The house pointed towards the eastern side of the pond. He had the luxury of getting up and watching sunrises every day. Over here, it would have been his fireplace. Right over here would have been a very modest bed, not very comfortable as you can imagine. In his house, he only had 3 chairs. And in his quote from his book, Walden, he says he had 1 for solitude, 2 for friendship, and 3 for society. Thoreau, when he was out here, he didn't want to spend his time working for money so that he could purchase possessions. He was out here to get closer to nature. So he didn't have much, but he didn't want much. This was all he needed. As he said, he had nature all around him. What else would you need? Now, Thoreau was always into the outdoors. He was a naturalist from a teenager. But once he lived out here for a while, he realized that there was a whole other world around him that even he wasn't as aware about. And he wanted to share that experience with people. This would have been a main trail to get to Walden from Concord in those days. So every time somebody wanted to come to Walden Pond, they had to walk right by Thoreau's house. And he entertained visitors and he talked to people. And some people say he put himself on display when he was out here to maybe get a point across. Certainly it seems extreme to us today to try to go back and live a life like this. Thoreau was certainly roughing it, certainly by our standards. But even in his time, he would go into town periodically, and he would oftentimes go out to eat. So Thoreau wasn't purposely living it on the rough side. He liked to have a balance. And, you know, I think if people can take that message away, that's important today.
We've contaminated our lives with materialistic things. He's got a house here that's an all-in-one unit. You've got a bed, you've got heating, you've got your writing desk, you get everything you need, and I'm sure he went to the toilet in the woods probably, but we could figure out some tiny little attachment for that. But we could live a lot less materialistic than what we are today.
Well, Thoreau was certainly an early conservationist, and some people will go and say that Thoreau was the father of the American conservation movement because of his life here at Walden Pond. Towards the end of Thoreau's life, he started studying ecology, but that word didn't exist at that time. This is in the late 1850s. He wanted to know how the trees got here and how they grow. So he was starting to study the succession of seeds and forestry, and he was really thinking about ecology really before the term existed. So really, again, ahead of his time. We think of him as an early conservationist, but he was also an early ecologist. Thoreau's experiment and his life out here at Walden Pond certainly enlightened people for generations to come. And as we lose more open space today, his legacy and his writings of Walden and nature have more meaning now than ever.